Welcome to another edition of the College 12 Pack. I'm your host, Patrick Conn from the collegesportswire.usatoday.com. With me each and every week, Tyler Nettuno. I want to go ahead and apologize for butchering your name last week. I was trying to avoid from butchering DJ Alphabet Soup's name, and I just went ahead and butchered yours instead. But welcome to another episode. Tyler, we've got a lot to get into today. We had a college World Series coming up. The Super Regionals got wrapped up this past weekend. We had some tough matchups, and then we had some blowouts. We had some teams that just proved that they weren't quite ready for Omaha. What an experience, though. We're going to start with your neck of the woods, though, as we recap the Super Regionals. LSU just runs right through Kentucky. Just too much firepower on that team. Just looking back at the two games, obviously game one, blowout 14-0. They win the second game 8-3. Any quick takeaways from that series?
LSU just looks like, the team that we thought they were going to be earlier in the year when they were the, unanimous preseason number one team and number one team throughout the season. Had to deal with a 7-hour rain delay on Saturday night. Ultimately played really late, even local time. But they got, big 14-0 win and then looked pretty solid in game two. Was a little tight. They pulled away in the ninth, but overall really solid weekend. Their starting pitching was really good. Their bullpen was great. So really getting hot at the right time as they go into Omaha.
Yeah, I mean, that's the right time to be hot as they go into the College World Series. Another series that was kind of a blowout was a quick two-game set. We had TCU taking out the darlings, Indiana State. No Cinderella story for them. And then also we had your team, the Florida Gators, who ran through South Carolina after getting swept by them in the regular season. Really just, again, another team that's kind of catching fire at the right time. We saw what they had to do after they lose game one in the regionals or game two against Texas Tech. They lose that game, but they go on. They beat Tech twice, and then they go into South Carolina series and just sweep them away. I think TCU, Florida, those are teams that we expect to be there each and every year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Florida's kind of, I think, in a similar position to where LSU was, where, a lot of talent on the team, a lot of expectations coming into the year, sort of hit a dip in the middle, but everything seems to be clicking right now. Florida's pitching, with the exception of that loss to Texas Tech, the first time, has been phenomenal all tournament long. And the offense is starting to wake up too. And when it's on, it's the best lineup in the country. So that's a hot team. And TCU, played two tough games against Indiana State. Neither were, particularly big blowouts, but win comfortably in that series over the weekend. Got the added advantage of being able to host in Fort Worth. That series was supposed to be in Terre Haute, but they had prior event scheduled, couldn't accommodate a super regional, unfortunately. So they had to go on the road, and it didn't work for them.
Yeah, and then we can head on over to Charlottesville. Duke wins game one, gets blown out in game 2 and 3. Virginia just shows the experience. Duke not quite ready for the big, to be on the big stage yet. I mean, but I think that's a program that's heading in the right direction. But again, Virginia is just one of those teams that it seems like each and every year they're a strong contender to go to the College World Series and even win it.
Yeah, Duke came really close to making it to Omaha for the first time in, I think, like 50 years or something like that. It's been a really long time. But, you just see why having experience in the postseason is so important when you get this far into the tournament. Knowing how to manage your pitchers, knowing how to deal with elimination games. That's obviously something this Virginia program is very familiar with. And, they almost swept this series, actually. Game one, to win it, Duke had to rob a very near walk-off home run in the bottom of the ninth. They were able to snag that ball just over the wall and force game three. But, a Duke program, like you said, on the rise, looking good this season, but just didn't quite have the juice to get the win in Charlottesville.
And then talking about experience, we have Tennessee over in Hattiesburg. They lose one of those, the first game. They got to win game 2 to force a game 3, and they end up winning that game as well. So you talk about a team that, again, relies on so much of their experience. They're a team that's been there. I mean, last year they were the number one team for pretty much most of the year. Unfortunately, they don't win the championship. It does stay in the SEC. But, you look at them, and then obviously here in a second we're going to get into this year's darlings, Oral Roberts. But what can we say about Tennessee? Is a team that when you think you've got them cornered, they just find a way.
Yeah, I think maybe the gutsiest performance of the week was from Tennessee. They really just went in and on the road against a team that was in the super regional round last year. They've had a disappointing season in a lot of ways. Went in preseason top 3, didn't really work out that way, but they were phenomenal. Found them with their back against the wall for a lot of the week. They had to deal with game 1 got postponed, had to pick it up the next day. They lost, overcame a 4-0 lead in game 2. Just like I said, a really gutsy performance for Tennessee this weekend to get to Omaha.
And then we got the Oregon Ducks, who beat Oral Roberts in the first game 9-8. Ball to them 8-7 in game 2, and then 11-6 in the decisive game 3. And now Oral Roberts is heading to Omaha. There's going to be a lot of people watching them. Could they be, a TCU in football who went to the championship game? Can they be like, San Diego State, who played for a national championship in basketball? Is Oral Roberts another one of these teams that maybe we can see in a championship game, an unlikely team?
Yeah, you very well could. A 50-win team, like we talked about last week, was pretty clearly underseeded. And this has been a tournament historically that's been pretty friendly to underdogs. We saw Coastal Carolina win a national title in 2016. So, yeah, absolutely. I think they can make some noise. They had, the most exciting super regional of the weekend. First 2 games against Oregon, traded walk-offs, won pretty decisively in game 3, though. So, yeah, they come in with a lot of momentum. Been really impressive so far this tournament.
We had a Wake Forest team, number 1 team in the country. They've kind of been there all year, right below LSU until they ultimately took over. Blasted an Alabama team who fired their coach earlier this year due to those gambling situation going on. And then obviously we had Texas, Stanford playing, a close game, and there might have been some controversial calls in game 3, but ultimately Stanford, another team who is habitually makes a trip to Omaha. They're back in it. Any quick takeaways from those 2 games before we kind of preview the College World Series?
Yeah, not a ton from the Wake one. They, had a bit of a tough game in the first one, but they really broke it open in game 2. They won 22-5. And, Texas Stanford really just, Stanford's a team that doesn't have necessarily the pitching depth that some of these other teams in Omaha do. And that's why Quinn Matthews with the 156 pitch, 16 strikeout performance on Sunday night was so insane. Whether that's, ethical pitching usage is a different question, but obviously that's what the team needed to get that series win this weekend. So it worked out.
It does work out. And now we are heading to the College World Series. Game 1, we're going to kick it off. Oral Roberts, TCU. I think that's a fantastic matchup. It's really, again, we're talking about the underdog going up against a TCU program that, like we've said, has been here time and time again. I'm just curious if that magic continues past game 1.
Yeah, I certainly think it could. This is a TCU team that has, been a really good team for a lot of the season, but, I don't think they're a team that's, inherently been a lot better than Oral Roberts. Like I totally could see Oral Roberts going on a deep run. And like I said, this is a tournament where there's precedent for teams like that, coming in as a non-nationally seeded team, as a mid-major team and making a deep run. So yeah, absolutely. Obviously going to be tough with Florida and Virginia in that side of the bracket, but it's definitely doable. Yeah,
game 2, 2 very veteran teams that have been here, Florida versus Virginia. Florida's got a lot of talent, obviously. They got players that are going to be in the MLB draft. Really, when you look at with those 2 programs, I feel like that's anybody's ball game. It's if you get the good college matchup, honestly, or the good pitching matchup in that game. Can you take advantage, get to their bullpen early, is really what it's going to come down to.
So, yeah, 2 teams, no strangers to playing each other in Omaha. It's happened before. They're pretty frequently here. And it's an interesting contrast of styles because you've got a Virginia team that's one of the better pitching staffs in the country versus a Florida team that's probably the best lineup in the country. And as good as Florida is with guys like Wyatt Langford and Jack Caglione and Josh Rivera, we've seen good pitching staffs figure them out at different times this season and be able to really shut them down. We even saw it at the beginning of the regional, those first 2 games against Florida A&M and Texas Tech. The offense was kind of struggling to get going. So I think the real question in that one is going to be, can this Virginia pitching staff, keep those bats cold? And if they can, they're probably going to win. And if they can't, they're probably not. I think it's that simple.
And then over in bracket 2 on Saturday, we got Stanford, Wake Forest, and then Tennessee, LSU. This is a matchup we've seen a bunch. We're going to see it again. I think that these are two really well put together teams, two veteran coaches who know what to do. I think the interesting thing is to see how Wake Forest does with the Stanford team, who you said doesn't have the greatest pitching staff. Can they slow down that Wake Forest offense?
Absolutely. I mean, this is going to be the toughest test Wake has faced in the tournament so far. But at the same time, it is a team that has struggled, from a pitching perspective against a team with so many good hitters like Wake. That's going to be a really, really tough matchup for Stanford. I think I would certainly give the early edge right now to Wake just because of that.
And I'm going to go here, bold prediction. My championship matchup, LSU versus Oral Roberts. I think that would be a fantastic way to wrap up the College World Series. But that's who I'm going with. Bracket 1, bracket 2. Oral Roberts comes out, beats a lot of talented teams, and they play LSU for the title.
I think I'm going to say Florida and Wake Forest in the title series. I think that's my pick. I'm going to go in chalk.
Well, all righty. So there you have it. There are our World Series picks. We'll see which one of us is right and which one will be eating a little crow by the time that is all said and done. All right, so now we're going to dive into our main topic that we want to discuss this week on the College 12-Pack. We're talking about the 10 best games, our best games of the 2023 college football season. Now, I have 5 games. Tyler has 5 games. Now, these are in chronological order. They are not in the order of what we feel is the best game. But, Tyler, I'm going to let you kick it off this week. What game was number 1 on your list chronologically?
Yeah, so we're starting at week 1. I think it's an action-packed first week of the season, but I think this is probably the best game of the week. It's the rematch between LSU and Florida State. Played to kick off last season in New Orleans. This time they're facing off down in Orlando. And last year's game was a weird one. FSU ultimately wins. LSU has some special teams problems, has an extra point blocked the very last second, cost them the win. Both teams go on to have much better seasons than I think either really anticipated. And now they enter this year with a lot more momentum and a lot more around both of them. It's probably going to be a top 10 matchup. It's going to have serious college football playoff implications. I mean, both these teams have tough matchups down the stretch. Loser of this game really doesn't have a very big margin for error. I think especially if you're LSU and lose this game, that becomes even tougher if you're trying to make a playoff run. So, I think this just, of all the games in the first week, I don't think there's any that we're going to be talking about the significance of come November as much as this one.
Yeah, you have Jordan Travis, Jaden Daniels. These offenses are locked and loaded. They've been pouring in the transfers, both teams. Who wins, Brian Kelly versus Norvell's team? That's a really good matchup. That's hard to top week 1. I'm going to go with my game, my number 1 game on here. Texas versus Alabama in Tuscaloosa. It's going to be much different than last year because they don't have a Bryce Young. They don't have Jahmyr Gibbs. There's a lot of questions about Alabama, and most of it falls on the offensive side of the ball. Who's the quarterback? What kind of system are we going to see? Which wide receiver steps up? Which running back kind of steps into that mold? But the big question is Texas ready for the SEC? And we're going to find out real quick. We saw last year it was a close game. But if Quinn Ewers stays healthy in that game, they probably win, or at least have a really good shot to win. And they, even with Hudson Card, they had a shot. But looking at that game, for me, that's my biggest matchup early season. I really want to see these two teams go at it. Can Steve Sarkisian beat his old boss, Nick Saban, in Titletown?
Absolutely. One of the most interesting matchups earlier in the year. And I was just going to say what you said. If Quinn Ewers stays healthy in that game last year, Texas probably wins it. I think both of us probably expect that this Texas team is going to take at least a bit of a leap this year. So this is the time to do it. I think Sarkisian, time to go get a statement win.
Yeah, if you looked at right now on paper, the Texas offense blows them away when you look at what they have. Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, you're talking about Jordan Whittington returning, Isaiah Nair, who we didn't even get to see last year because he tore his ACL. There's plenty of offense. All right, Tyler, who we got game 2 on your list?
Yeah, so I'm actually just now realizing I broke with chronological order a little bit here, but it's all week one. So we're sticking within week one here. Colorado TCU, and probably not gonna be an actual very good football game. At least maybe it'll be, but TCU probably gonna be the heavy favorite there. But I think from a narrative perspective, there's maybe not a more interesting game all season, just because we're kicking off the year. Obviously, everyone knows Deion Sanders at Colorado really pushing the new roster management tools you're allowed, really pushing that to the absolute limit. I think they had like 50 guys transfer out since he took over, something like that, maybe even more. So going to be a really new look team. They went 1-11 last year. Going to be fascinating to see what kind of leap, if any, they can take with Deion this year. And then taking on a team in TCU that came out of nowhere last year, made a run to the national title, but they lose a lot. They lose a lot of key pieces on both sides of the ball. Where does this team fit under Sonny Dykes in the new Big 12? Is this team set to dominate, or was it a flash in the pan sort of thing? I just think from a narrative perspective, I'm just fascinated by this game.
Yeah, the last year against TCU against Colorado, Chandler Morris was named starting quarterback, gets hurt. Max Duggan comes in and doesn't relinquish it, runs all the way to the national championship game. Obviously, they got blown out in that game, but the fact that they even made it to the national championship game just speaks volumes to what Sonny Dykes was doing there in Fort Worth. And yeah, you talked about it, Colorado. And what I'm really interested in, I want to see how they use Travis Hunter. Is he going to play offense and defense? Like, how does, he's probably their best pass catcher, but he's also probably their best corner. I want to see how they're going to use him and maybe see a lot of two-way play from him. We'll find out if they have some packages and whatnot. But yeah, bringing Deion, into Colorado, and now with all the talk around the Big 12 and expansion and Colorado coming back, this could be a future Big 12 matchup between TCU and Colorado early on, week one. But I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to go back to the ACC. This is my number 2 game on my list. Florida State, Clemson. Obviously, you got a Florida State team who, surprised a lot of people. Like we talked about, they won 10 games. They lost 3 games in a row, but were able to right the ship, go all the way to the Cheez-It Bowl, which will now be called the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Won that game against Oklahoma. They look like a team, like you said, who can make a run to the college football playoff. To get there, they're going to have to get through Clemson. And Clemson's got a new look. Cade Klubnik running the offense, but it's not a Brandon Streeter offense. We got Garrett Riley coming over from TCU to run that program. So, at least on the offensive side of the ball. So I think this is a huge matchup with a lot of implications, whether it's ACC title or talking about the college football playoff, trying to get in that Final Four.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a game that, historically, not really even that long ago, was one of the premier matchups all season, had serious playoff implications. It's been a while since we've had a Florida State Clemson game with that kind of juice. Seems like we're going to get it this year. It seems like the way we're shaping up, at least.
All right, next game on your list. Are we going back to the SEC, Tyler?
We are going back to the SEC and doing another rematch from last season. Probably one of the games of the entire season in college football. LSU, Alabama. Brian Kelly wins that game year one, massive win, sea change in the SEC West. He wins that division his first year. Coming back in year two, you're going to hear a lot of hype about this LSU team being a potential college football playoff team, especially as we get closer to the season. And as we stand right now, I think they're probably a more complete team than Alabama is. So, this one's going to be, it's a late season matchup. So obviously, all sorts of college football playoff and division race implications. And it's, this one's going to be on the road in Tuscaloosa. Last year, LSU won it in Baton Rouge. So really interesting to me where it, can Brian Kelly pull it off again? If LSU wins this game 2 years in a row, I don't know what that says about Alabama's reign in the SEC West, but I guess the SEC West is going to come to an end, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. That, and especially in this series that, Nick Saban has dominated, since going to Alabama. There have been some mishaps here and there, but, that's going to be huge. How does Malik Neighbors look in this game? Does Mason Taylor catch another game-winning 2-point conversion? Those are the questions that I have. All right, but we're going to shift gears. We're going to go back to my neck of the woods in the Big 12 in the final Big 12 matchup between Texas, Oklahoma, Red River rivalry, Dallas, Texas on the Texas State Fairgrounds. I have to say, regardless of how this game ended last year, 49-0, but let's be honest, Dylan Gabriel wasn't there, and his backup was not ready for that stage. And Texas was able to take advantage. But what are the changes that Brent Venables makes going into this year? That's going to be the big question. His calling card is defense. If he gives up another 49 points, I don't know if he's going to make it back to Norman, Oklahoma for that mid-October matchup in Dallas.
No, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, Brett Venables, it's only year 2, but really can't afford to not take a big step forward this year. And Texas, like we talked about, is poised to be a very good team potentially. You got to find a way to at least be competitive in this game if you're Oklahoma. I mean, I'm not saying you're necessarily got to expect to win it, but it can't be anything like what happened last year. I mean, just there's no question about it.
I guess the only good thing is they don't have to worry about Bijan Robinson this year.
True.
All right, so game 4, Pac-12. I know Tyler's been itching to talk about this game.
Yeah, it's a matchup we haven't seen in a while. It's been since 2020, but I've got the late season matchup between Oregon and USC up in Eugene. You know, 2 potential Heisman contender quarterbacks in this game with Caleb Williams and Bo Nix. You know, I think winner of this game, especially with it being so late in the season, will probably be in a very good spot to push for a playoff spot. And I just think it's a game I'm really fascinated by. You know, games like we've seen Washington, Oregon, we've seen USC, Utah. I feel like this is one we just haven't seen as much of, and especially with both these programs having new coaches now, I'm really interested to see how this iteration is going to go down.
Yeah, it's got to be one of those huge matchups, obviously because of the Pac-12, but, you know, individually, how does this speak to the Heisman resume of Bo Nix, of Caleb Williams? We know the offense. We know the players that are going to be in it, but that is going to be a huge matchup. I'm going to stay in the Pac-12, and I'm going to actually bring up a game that you just talked about. USC, Utah. This is a team that lost twice last year to Utah. You know, and one was a shootout and the other was not. And you look at what Utah was able to do when the Pac-12 go back to the Rose Bowl. Obviously, they lost again to the Big Ten. But that was a game that I expected USC to be in, but they didn't win. And so I'm looking at that. I'm looking at that game right now as a huge matchup this coming season.
Yeah, I mean, they played twice last year, and neither game went particularly well for USC. Their defense struggled in their games against the toughest teams last season, and they gave up, I think, like a combined 90 points in the 2 games against Utah last year. Something's got to go different. I mean, they got to figure out a way to stop them, or they're not going to be they're not going to be a playoff contending team again. They're going to be a very good team that's not quite there.
Absolutely. All right, Tyler, let's go into your last game. What is number 5 on your list?
Yeah, so my last game is one that everyone kind of always has circled every single year. It's the game. You know, we got Michigan, Ohio State, and Michigan's won it back-to-back seasons. I mean, Ryan Day is obviously a good coach. I don't think anyone would really dispute that, but we already saw a little bit of anxiety about the situation with him from Ohio State fans last season. And they were arguably a timeout call on a fake punt away from winning a national title. So if they lose this for a 3rd straight year, it's not going to be – I mean, it's just not going to be good. And also, I think Michigan comes in probably as the team looking to be in a better spot. I mean, they definitely have more continuity, at least on offense, bringing back J.J. McCarthy and their 2-star running backs and Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. Meanwhile, we don't even know who's going to be playing quarterback for Ohio State right now, at least for sure. I mean – they got to find a way. Like we've talked about, teams just got to find a way. Ohio State's got to find a way to win this game. You can't lose to Michigan 3 years in a row.
It's going to be a tough one considering everybody that's returning, you know, on the Michigan side, whether you talk about the 2 running backs, Donovan Edwards, Blake Corum. Obviously, you got, you know, J.J. McCarthy coming back. But, you know, Ohio State has some pretty big dogs returning. Whether you talk about the running backs, Mayan Williams, Travion Henderson, and then obviously the wide receivers. I mean, you talk about Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr., who's the best wide receiver in the country. Lots of firepower in this game, so I expect a high-scoring affair once again in the game. That's huge. All right, my 5th game doesn't get a lot of love as far as college playoff or any of those implications. I got to talk about Army, Navy. I mean, we talk about this. I love the fact that they get their own week. No other game is on. We talk about the different uniforms, the show that they put on, and obviously spending time watching football and, paying tribute to the troops who allow us to do this each and every day. I think it's fantastic to watch these guys. But how do you feel about that game being on the list, Army, Navy, at the end of the year in December?
That game's just, it's always such a great spectacle. It's always a lot of fun. And I think it's just one of the things that really shows why college football can be so great when a game between two teams that aren't, relevant in the college football playoff race and the Heisman race and all these things, when they can play a game on prime time on national television and draw the interest it gets. I think that's great. This series has been a bit streaky at times. Recent years have been competitive, though. The last 4 games have been split. And it's pretty much, it seems like these games are always pretty competitive on the field. Maybe it's just a style of play thing, but it doesn't really matter whether one team comes in at 9-2 and the other comes in at 2-9. They always seem to play a good game of football.
And who doesn't love Service Academy football? Talking about triple option. Well, we may not see a whole lot of that moving forward. There is a new head coach at Navy, so we're going to see kind of how that all plays in the upcoming year. But that's our 10 games that we're looking forward to in the 2023 season. And that's going to wrap up this week's edition of the College 12 Pack with Tyler Nettuno from LSU Tigers Wire. I'm Patrick Conn, the senior editor of the College Wires, and we will check y'all next week where we start previewing some of these conferences as we get ready for the 2023 college football season.